do you think that Jesus was a nice guy? Do you think he's a nice guy, right? I mean, I think whenever I think about Jesus, I would like to think so. At least that's kind of how I pictured him in my mind. Whenever you think of a picture of Jesus, what do you think of, right? Sometimes I think of, those classic pictures that we have, like this one here where Jesus is holding a lamb, Like that's kind of what I go to is that picture. I think that picture actually hung up in my church, in First Christian Church in Texhoma. That's kind of our go-to. Or you might think about Jesus with, hanging out with children and being super approachable and nice. We think like that in terms of who Jesus is, or maybe overall, you've just kind of had this picture of Jesus as your best friend, or, like this picture of Buddy Jesus, saying, hey, you, how you doing, kind of thing. I think we all, think that Jesus is nice and that he's friendly and that he's just a nice guy, but then he says this in Luke 14:26. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate their father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And you're just sitting there thinking, whoa, that is not Buddy Jesus. That's not nice Jesus right here. That doesn't even sound like Jesus at all. That sounds kind of weird. Right? And I remember this, regarding this verse in the Bible, I remember whenever I was a kid and I got in trouble from my parents and I was really upset with them. I didn't think the punishment fit the crime, and I went into my room where I was cast, and I went and I opened up the Bible and I highlighted Luke 14:26. I hate my father and mother, and so therefore I'm worthy to be Jesus' disciple. That highlight still exists in my first Bible. Well, I thought that was pretty great until my son Atticus, he got a new Bible for him a few years ago, and I was flipping through. I said, have you highlighted anything? He said, oh yeah, I've got one. And the only highlight that was in there was Luke 14:26. All of a sudden wasn't too impressed with it. We are on the tail end of a series called Jesus' Most Confounding Statements. And these are statements that Jesus said that just kind of stretch us in terms of, it doesn't sound like something that he would say. It doesn't sound like that even belongs in the Bible. But I want to get to these statements. I don't want to avoid them. I actually want to press into them, because when we press into these statements, the ones that are hardest to understand, we see that even the hard ones to understand have explanations, that we can trust that whatever, even when we're uncomfortable with what's in the Bible, we can trust it because it has deep meaning for us. And so we're on the tail end of that right now. Next week, Gary Lehman is going to preach. Our first pastor, New Life's very first pastor, he's going to preach. I'm not going to be gone. I'm going to be here, but I've asked him to come and share. I just love hearing him preach, and he just does a great job. But he's going to get Jesus' weird statement of, eat my flesh and drink my blood, right? And so that's where we're going to finish up with. But today, we're going to dive into this controversial statement to hate your father and mother. Your wife and your children and your brothers and your sisters, Now for some of us, some of those are maybe easier than others, But he says, even your own life. So let's read it again. Go to Luke chapter 14. If you brought your Bibles, thank you. If not, hey, you're good too. It's going to be on the screen, or there's a Bible in front of you as well. But Luke chapter 14, and let's go 25. 14:25. Let's read the paragraph. It says, large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate their father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Now, Jesus is not like most preachers right here. whenever most preachers get a crowd gathered, they're pretty happy about it, right? They want to keep that momentum going. Every time Jesus gets a crowd, what's he do? He turns around and says, we got a little bit too many people, I think. We need to thin the herd a little bit. And he says something or does something like this. And I think this is one of those times. I mean, this is a shocking thing to say, to hate your family. Or else if you don't, then you're not worthy of me. It's shocking to us, but especially in their culture. I mean, honoring your father and mother is important to all of us, right? Taking care of your parents and doing those things, that's important to every culture. But especially in their culture, it was one of their core values in their culture. I mean, it literally made one of the short list, the 10 Commandments. It was the 5th commandment, and it was the first one that had to do with human-to-human relationships. I mean, it is at the top of the list here for them. Honor your father and mother. And they took it seriously. Did you guys know that disrespecting your parents could be punishable by death? Okay? In Exodus 21:17, it says, anyone who curses their father or mother must be put to death. Now, as an adult, that's the verse that I've highlighted. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, right? So same chapter, but 2 books later, in Deuteronomy 21, it says, a stubborn and rebellious son who would not obey his parents could be brought to the elders and executed. Okay? Now, our elders, they meet once a month, and so if you need something to be put on the agenda list, let me know. In their culture, it was important to honor your family. Not just something you should do, but it was at the top of their list. It was important to preserve honor and preserve order in their culture. But also, you got to think about this. There was no Social Security back then. There was no social safety net back then. This was a way for them to not only honor their parents, but actually take care of their parents, because without that, there's nothing left. My parents are going to, they're very healthy. They're trying to stay healthy desperately, because they know that as soon as they can't take care of themselves, boom, they're off to the nursing home, right? I've already got the deposit placed. Just kidding. But my parents watch this, so I'm kidding. But by taking care of their parents, they preserved the family land, which was important to them, but also the family name. And here's the thing. Jesus' statement not only was shocking, but it actually might have even sounded heretical. Not just shocking, but heretical. Because in Deuteronomy chapter 13, watch this. In Deuteronomy 13, God says that there is a time when you must break family ties. And it says this, and he says, if your very own brother or your son or daughter or the wife that you love or your closest friend, if they secretly entice you to follow other gods, don't yield to them. That's when it's okay to break ties. Whenever they are trying to get you to walk away from your faith, you break ties. You have to be loyal to God, right? Well, what does Jesus do with that here? He takes that passage in Deuteronomy chapter 13 and he applies it to who? Himself. He flips it and says, no, you need to break family ties in order to stay loyal to me. That's a big deal. What he's saying is serious. And so you got to be wondering, like, why is he saying that? There's got to be an explanation for this kind of talk, right? Well, there is. We know from the rest of the Bible that Jesus doesn't require you to renounce your family in order to follow him. We see this one statement, if you don't hate your father and mother, you're not worthy to be my disciple. We see that, but then when we apply the rest of the Bible, we know that Jesus doesn't require you to disavow your family to follow him. That would be a cult. That's not what Jesus is doing. And that actually happens more than you might think. The most recent one that I've seen that is still happening today was a guy named Pastor Robert Shin in a church in California, in Los Angeles, called Shekinah Church. And he takes this scripture and he uses it to say that you must disavow, you must break ties with your family in order to be qualified to follow Jesus. That's like the starting point to follow Jesus. He does this to isolate his followers so that they're loyal to him. That's not what Jesus is saying. And that's not what Jesus is doing. Jesus is not anti-family. He actually gets super upset with the Pharisees and just puts them on blast for not honoring their fathers and mother in Mark chapter 7. Even, do you remember when he's dying on the cross? He's hanging there on the cross. What did he ask his disciple, his best friend John, to do for his own mother? Do you remember? Mary, his mother Mary, is standing there at the cross, at the foot of the cross, and he says, John, this is now your mother. In other words, take care of my mom, right? His dying wish was to honor his mom. Paul later says that anyone who doesn't provide for their family is worse than an unbeliever. He says that in in 1 Timothy 5:8. So why did Jesus say then that you must hate your family? Okay, here we go. In the Old Testament, there is language like this. This hate, love language in the Old Testament. Whenever hate and love are mixed together, it is a Hebrew idiom, right? Or an expression, if you will, of priority, right? It's a prioritization, right? I hate one thing and I love another thing. It's not that they necessarily hate it. It's I prefer this other thing. A good example is in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 15. And he says, if a man has two wives, one hated and the other loved, and you start thinking, well, why would somebody have a wife that he hated, right? Well, it's not that he would hate her. The command is if you have two wives and one is preferred or the other, different time, right? Obviously, we don't do that today. But then he gives the command on what to do with your inheritance if the one that you didn't prefer has a firstborn child. And he sends preference to that one, right? We see this in real life played out with the story of Jacob. Do you remember this? Jacob wanted to marry Laban's daughter Rachel. And he really loved her, but Laban forced him to marry his daughter Leah because he didn't think she was ever going to get married, and he wanted her to be taken care of. So he had to marry Leah in order to get Rachel. And it said of her that Jacob loved Rachel but hated Leah. He didn't hate Leah. It's an idiom, it's an expression to say that he preferred Rachel. That's the one that he was in love with. If I can give you one more, in Malachi chapter 1, verse 2 and 3, it says that God is talking, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. God didn't hate Esau. In fact, he blessed Esau and made him fruitful in the land. But he preferred Jacob because, in essence, he was going to let Jacob's line be the line that Jesus came from. So he preferred Jacob, and he was going to show honor to Jacob. It's not that he hated them in the sense of hate that we talk about today. So when Jesus says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate their father and mother, cannot be my disciple, he's using that same language. He's talking about what? Priority. In other words, your love for him, your love for Jesus must be so great that every other love in your life doesn't even come close to your love for Jesus. There can be no question that there is a gap there can be no confusion to you or the people around you that there is a first place, and it is Jesus, and then the second place is down here. That's what he was saying. Now, some of us need to hear this. Hating your family is not the goal, okay? Some of the teenagers in here just tuned me out, you know. This wasn't the only time that Jesus told people this, though. In fact, we see that he said this several times. The other time that it's recorded in Scripture is in Matthew. Watch this. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 37. It says, anyone who loves their father or mother more, not hates, but loves more, right? Same thing, but now he's talking to his disciples. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Luke uses the idiom, the expression. Matthew gives the interpretive meaning. It's not about hostility. It's about priority. And the context, what's going on here in Matthew, the context is this. Jesus is speaking only here to his disciples. And this comes at the end of instructions. Jesus is sending his disciples out to do ministry. He's about to send them out, and so he tells them, he says, okay, here's your instructions. Here's who to go to. Here's what to pack. You know, it's like our teenagers are going to high school camp this week, and so I sent out a packing list for them, right? Jesus is doing that. But then at the very end of that, he says this, you're going to get some resistance. And he was upfront and he was honest about what ministry was going to be for these guys. And he said, you're going to get some resistance in this thing. And some pretty solid resistance. In fact, if you look in Matthew chapter 10, verse 21, look at what Jesus said. He said, brother will betray brother to death. And a father his child, and children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. I mean, well, this is weighty stuff here. And this certainly happened. It did not happen on that trip, though. That kind of stuff did not happen whenever he sent his 12 disciples out on that trip, but it did later. And the early church saw this, and we still see it even to this day. Parents turned in their children for being Christians under Roman persecution. Children have testified against their parents in Maoist China and North Korea. And right now in the Islamic world, such as North India, conversion to Christianity leads to family betrayal, arrests, or even honor killings. That is happening right now. Some of you guys might remember some time ago I told you about my friend Mohammed Faridi. You remember that? Who was born in Tehran, Iran, not India, Iran. He told me at lunch, we were at like a Quiznos, and he told me that the only certain way to enter paradise in Islam, the only way you can be certain about it is if you die as a martyr. So he wanted to be certain about his salvation, so he began as a teenager to train to be a martyr. And he wanted to kill Christians, especially American Christians. But when he was 22, he ran into an old high school friend and was catching up. And there was something different. There was something off about him, and he was acting different. And he said, just finally asked him, what's going on? And he just outed himself, and he said, I converted to Christianity. He said, I follow Jesus now, and it's changed everything for me. Well, in that moment, he had a real confusion because he knew that the law there is you must kill him. And I asked him, I said, is that okay? Can you just kill somebody right then and there? And he said, if you have another witness that heard them say, and there's two witnesses, you will go before the court, the other witness will say, yes, he said he was a Christian, and then the judge will shake your hand and thank you for your service. But he didn't want to kill his friend. And so he was torn. So he went to church, and he heard the message about Jesus, and he was changed. He gave his life to Jesus. And so then he goes home, and eventually his family finds out, and he says to his family, I've become a Christian. What do? Well, they try to kill him. And so he fled. And so that's why he's now in America, and that's why I sat with him at a Quiznos in Colorado Springs. It happens today. This is something that is happening today, because when Jesus shows up, it forces us to make a decision. And Jesus just plainly told them in verse 22, you will be hated. Jesus claimed to be God. And he said, the only way to heaven is through me. If you believe in me, and if you call me Lord, then you will get to heaven. That kind of forces people to make a choice, make a decision. And there's going to be conflict there. There's going to be people who believe that and love him, and then there's going to be people who despise that and hate that. And it's going to come into conflict. The very presence of Jesus creates either love or conflict. And this is why Jesus said in verse 34 through 36, he says, do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. That's why he said that. It was because of the inevitable conflict that is going to happen. We don't start the conflict. That is not what he wants us to do. The conflict will be inevitable. The central question is, does Jesus want to divide families? Well, no, obviously not. But unfortunately, it has happened, and it will happen as people put their faith in Jesus. It's in the face of that conflict that Jesus says in verse 37, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Because it's about priority. Jesus must be our number one priority, bar none. And then he says in verse 38, he says, whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. It's not even just about choosing Jesus over your family. It's about choosing Jesus over your own desires. Of course, it was another shocking statement to say that. You've heard guys preach before about the cross and how offensive that was to their culture. What an awful symbol of shame it was. If you went into our church and you took down all the crosses in our church, some people are probably going to be upset, right? Because the cross means something to us. It has deep, powerful meaning to us. There was somebody that came to me some time ago, and they said, why don't we have any crosses, in this building? I just don't see any. And I thought, golly, I thought we had a lot. And so after they left, I went and I counted all the crosses in the building. I did. And in about 10 minutes, I counted all of them. Would you believe me if I said that we had 249 crosses in this building? Now, some of you are like, what? Look at the sides of the pews there. That's a lot of them right there. We got 3 on each side of the pew right there. Right there. But in fact, 228 of them are right there on the pew. But there actually used to be even more crosses in here. About a year ago, I was in the prayer room. Some of you guys know that down this hallway is our prayer room. And there was a wall in there with about 58 crosses on that little wall. And I thought, 58 is a little much. I think they got it, kind of thing. So I took some of those down. Guys, some people felt a certain kind of way about that. You know what I'm saying? And for good reason. Why? Because the cross means something to us. It's not just a decoration to us, is it? It means something. Now, if you take that same passion, that same emotion about taking down a cross in a church, and you compare it watch this, to what you would encounter if you put up a cross in their church. If you went to their synagogue and put a cross on their wall, what do you think would happen? You would get that and more, because the cross hadn't meant anything to them yet. It did, right? It meant suffering and shame. It was a symbol of the Roman dominance over them. And only criminals were killed on those. It was an awful, awful thing. So whenever Jesus says this, it is scandalous that he would tell his people to pick up their cross and to follow after him. You got to remember, Jesus was trying to get their attention. And he was trying to make it known that this is about priority. The bottom line is this: good things cannot become the ultimate thing. All these other things, your mom, your dad, your kids, your ambition, your business, your sports goals, your education, even yourself, those are what? Those are good things. Those are good things in our life. But they cannot become the ultimate thing. There has to be so much separation between your devotion to Jesus and your devotion to all these other things that it might seem like that you hate the second place thing. So, what does that mean for us? How does that look for us? It's just simple. Make Jesus first. So what does it look like to make Jesus first in our lives? Let me give you just 3 ways really quick. Number 1 is this: prioritize Jesus before your dearest people. Now this one's hard because your people are good. Your spouse, your parents, your kids, your girlfriend, your best friend, you're supposed to love them. And Jesus isn't telling you to stop. He's saying, I come first. Before them, it's me. There has to be separation. People cannot be confused about your love for Jesus and your love for your kids. But if somebody close to you is pulling you away from Jesus, pressuring you to compromise in your faith, you need to put some healthy distance in that relationship. But not if you're married. I'm not telling you to walk out on your marriage if your spouse doesn't believe. Paul addressed that in 1 Corinthians 7. He says, if your unbelieving spouse is willing to stay, then you need to stay. You love them and serve them in hopes that your faith might lead them to Jesus someday. But most of us don't have family members that are dragging us away from following Jesus. I think that most of us have a harder time not making our kids our saviors. We get so wrapped up in their events, their experiences, or their accomplishments that we start making decisions on what's best and what would serve them instead of being faithful to Him. In the name of being good parents, we let Jesus become a part-time priority when we can fit Him in after our kids' events. And here's what happens. We take good things, and we make it the ultimate thing. And in the end, it costs us more than we ever imagined. It costs us spiritually. It costs them spiritually. Because when we teach our kids that they come before Jesus, they eventually believe it. And can I say one other thing about this dynamic? Don't be the one to stop someone else in your family from going all in to Jesus. I had a high school kid in my youth group. This is almost 20 years ago, and I still haven't forgot about it. He went on a mission trip with our church to Haiti, and he came back, and he was just changed. I mean, God had got a hold of his heart, and he was smitten. And he came back, and he wanted to start being curious and researching out about becoming a missionary. That he felt like God may have a call on his life to go and serve people like that. And I was excited for him. I was thrilled because I knew that there is really no higher calling than when God calls a person to vocational ministry. Someone said long ago, if God calls you to be a minister, don't stoop to be a king. Well, that just makes me feel good, makes me, But really, is there anything greater than helping people make Jesus the Lord of your life for a job? Well, his mother didn't think so. And she squashed that idea real quick. And she would not even entertain the idea of losing her son as a minister in a foreign country. And don't make your kids have to choose between God's desire for their life and your desire for their life. Prioritize Jesus before your closest and your dearest people. But number 2 is this: prioritize Jesus before your deepest ambition. Everybody chases something. And for you, it might be your career success or your reputation or your financial goals or an image that you've built. You're smart or successful or you're self-made. But when Jesus says, even your own life, he's saying that those dreams, that those plans, those even come second. So ask yourself this question: is there anything that I want so badly that it's starting to compete with Jesus? Promotion, being known, maybe something physical or business goals or having a perfect family. Those are not bad things, are they? Those are good things. But when they become the ultimate things, they'll eventually demand your soul. The cross isn't just about dying to sin, it's about dying to self. And do you remember whenever Jesus said, seek first his kingdom? You remember this? Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and then all these other things will what? Will be given to you? Sometimes we get that mixed up, don't we? We seek first all these other things. And then, if there's time or if we can fit it in, then we'll seek his kingdom and his righteousness. But when you seek him first, you die to yourself. You don't lose your life. You find it. Prioritize Jesus before your dearest people and your deepest ambitions. And the last one is this: prioritize Jesus before your daily desires. I think for most of us, the real challenge isn't the big decisions of our life. Sometimes it's the small daily decisions of our life. Is Jesus important enough for you to seek him daily? I mean, he speaks through prayer, through his word, and through this community. Are you willing to read the Bible? Are you willing to show up at church and serve? It's in our small decisions. It's choosing Jesus over our anger. It's choosing Jesus over our language. It's choosing Jesus over gossip. I mean, if you want to carry a cross, let's start there in the small decisions. Bonhoeffer said, when Christ calls a man, he bids them to come and die. The bottom line is this: all these other things, your dearest people, your deepest ambitions, and your daily desires, those are good things, but they cannot become the ultimate thing. There should be so much space between your love for Jesus and your desire for all these other things that they look like second place. Because they are. This is a lordship issue. Have you accepted Jesus as your Savior? And have you accepted Jesus also as your Lord? If he's Lord, he's first. Let me pray.